This episode is brought to you by G2A. With so many different digital storefronts these days, it can be difficult to find the best bang for your gaming buck. G2A has been helping solve this problem since 2013, offering over 75,000 digital gaming products in one easy-to-navigate marketplace. In need of some awesome electronics, gadgets, or geeky merchandise, G2A has you covered there as well. And the best part, it all comes with steep discounts you won't find anywhere else. See the deals that you've been missing and let them know that we sent you by visiting bit.ly/RHPG2A. That's bit.ly/RHPG2A. Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to episode 38 of Retro Hangover.
Internet, welcome to the show where we are dashing to deflower devilish debutantes, rendering radically radar regardless whether it's really required. This is episode 38 of the Retro Hangover podcast. I'm your co-host, Chris Copleen, and I'm here, as always, with your host, Shane Dick Dragon Wampa Stompa Koski.
All right, I think so far this is my favorite nickname.
You like that one?
I shall henceforth be known as the Wampa Stompa.
The Dick Dragon Wampa Stompa.
Oh, yeah, well, let's not forget that part. That's important.
Gotta have the Dick Dragon, which is either a scaly dick or you're dragon.
I think, like, canonically at this point, based on fan feedback, I'm pretty sure it's just literally a dragon that is also a dick.
And there is a picture out there of the Dick Dragon, just so in case anyone wants to know that. It will be. I don't know. Can we publish that to our Instagram account, or would it be taken down? Is it like
I
it's
don't
borderline?
know. I don't know. I feel like we may need to. There may need to be some modifications to make it a little more clandestine, but we'll see. We'll see.
I mean, it's not a penis. Like it's modified.
Like, if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure the way you drew that, it had some like a hairy scrote on it, which I think might be a
it's
bit
his legs. There's his legs.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? You can make that argument when our content gets taken down. That's fine.
No, that's just that one.
So, Chris.
Hi.
What have you been up to the past week or two? Yeah.
Lots of time off, fortunately, which is nice because
that's different from the usual.
Yeah, 4-day weekend. I probably should have been getting ahead in college work, but I haven't, just because I'm just starting to get burnt out the whole college thing, which isn't good. Because eventually I'm going to be taking 2 courses this summer, which is probably not the smartest thing. But other than that, I've been playing Wild Arms 2. I'm trying to wrap that game up, as you've heard in the previous episode. So hopefully by our next episode, I will not say anything about Wild Arms 2 or not. I can just say the plot is horribly written. And it's just every emotional scene, well, not every emotional scene, but every scene that's supposed to have emotion to it is just completely ruined because the game decides to have the same generic music it has through the rest of the game and put it with that. And emotional scenes are just way too often. I don't know what they expected from the player they're making. It just seems to hit constantly. And it just gets to the point where I don't care anymore. In terms of emotion, like nothing's a surprise anymore. Doesn't have to say there aren't emotional scenes, but it's just kind of
so poorly written dialogue and ham-fisted emotional scenes. It makes me think of the Star Wars prequels.
Yes, except it's much more bland. I don't know. It's
do they talk about sand at any point?
That's Dune.
So they don't go into how coarse it is. And that it gets everywhere.
Oh God. Is that episode 2?
Yeah. Consequently, the same episode that has just a whole bunch of bullshit scenes of Padme and Anakin rolling around in a field somewhere on Naboo or something. And man, that movie is really bad.
That's probably... No, I'm not even going to say probably. That is the worst Star Wars movie. It doesn't even have the cheese factor where you can make fun of it, like the Christmas special. because you can watch the Christmas special, the infamous Christmas special, which is terrible. And, like, the acting is definitely worse than the Christmas special and the adventures of what's going on with the damn Wookiees. But, like, Star Wars Episode 2 is so bad, you can't even enjoy making fun of it because it's just, there's nothing there. It's just so stupid. Maybe you can. Yeah, maybe I need to go back and we need to have a...
There are some parts. Like, there's one scene, I believe is in Episode 2, that's really great where they've kind of memed it now. And they make it look like, you know, when Anakin's talking about Padme, they're sitting across from each other at a table, like having dinner or something, and he says something that's super serial killery, like I don't even know, like something about her being in his dreams since he was a kid or something, and she has this like panicked smile on her face, making it look like she's trying to hit a panic button like underneath the table.
Get me out of your spank bank.
So there, it has its moments, but it's pretty bad.
They need to re-release that movie, you know, episode, you know, the original trilogy style that Lucas did when he did that when Han shot first. I think he shot. I don't know how it goes. It's stupid. It's a stupid argument. No one cares. But in any case, they need to splice in like.
Yeah, no, that's good, Chris. Say that one of the biggest controversies in Star Wars lore is stupid in our Star Wars episode. This is a good way to get new listeners.
Well, because it gets you butthurt. It gets the emotions flowing. But they need to splice in like the Final Fantasy X scene in episode 2 with Tidus and Yuna laughing, and that would just make it perfect. Ha 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 ha. In any case,
please no.
Shane, what have you been up to?
Oh, what have I been up to? Well, most of you that are listening probably didn't catch it because I saw who was watching and none of y'all were there. But that's okay. We still love you. But I had a small personal achievement yesterday. You know, in my advanced years at this point, I'm basically a gaming grandpa now, I think. Anyway, but I managed to get through Contra 3 in easy and normal difficulty with, I think, only 2 continues and no save states. So, and that was all on Twitch live with Chris there to support / berate me at the same time. So that
mostly
was
berate.
Yeah, mostly. Yeah. But you know, I know it. I know you mean well, probably. But
we'll go with that.
Yeah, sure. But there was that. Outside of that, honestly, I haven't really been playing a whole lot different. I haven't had the time. I've been running around everywhere the past week or two for various family events. But I'm still cracking away at Pokemon Let's Go Eevee. And the new season in Diablo 3 started up within the past week or two. So season 17 is live. So I started a brand new seasonal character, rolling a wizard this time. So having some fun with that as usual, but that'll probably only last maybe a week or two at most. And then I've kind of done everything I need to do for the season. So Diablo 3 will go back on the virtual shelf until the next one. But
are you going to be playing WoW Vanilla?
Oh man, I don't know. That I'm torn about that. I'm going to be honest. Part of me, you know, realizes that I don't have the time in my life to do that kind of a thing. But at the same time, I really want to play it again. So
this time they get to charge you for what people have been able to accomplish for free for the past couple of years.
What do you mean for free?
They have $15 service charge, right? They're going to be charging $15 a month for you to play WoW Classic.
Oh, do you mean because people have been playing them on like illegal private servers for all these years? Is that what you mean?
Not illegal servers, freedom servers.
Yes, sure. Democracy servers, whatever.
Yes.
I mean, yes and no. I don't know. I guess having an officially supported version of it is nice because those private servers can be kind of janky. I actually played on one for a little while and it was mostly okay, but not having that server support there to make sure it's a smooth experience definitely kind of hinders things a little bit. So I don't know. I might check it out for a little while, maybe a month or two, just to see if my nostalgia is as accurate as I think it is. Based on some preliminary videos I've seen people posting of the beta for it, it's actually overall the response has been surprisingly positive. I was under the impression that people were going to realize that their rose-tinted glasses were making everything seem better than it actually was. But apparently, Blizzard has done a pretty good job of kind of faithfully recreating. I think it was patch 1.12 of the game, which includes the Onyxia and Molten Core raids, but also kind of including some mostly user interface quality of life improvements. So it seems they've struck a balance pretty well there. So I may check it out for a little bit at the very least. I can relive my 2004 college glory days.
Oh, those days. 2004.
Those days.
That's so long ago. It's like 15 years ago now. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
In any case, we missed the greatest segue earlier because what is this week's episode, Shane?
It's coarse and it gets everywhere.
That is correct. We are talking about Star Wars, one of the episodes today. Actually, is it canon anymore?
So I'm sure maybe one of our listeners that is more hardcore into Star Wars fandom than either of us could probably tell us what this means. But when I was doing my research for this episode, according to, I believe, Wikipedia, that was Wikipedia, by the way, not Wikipedia.
Wookie.
It is part of Canon C, whatever that means. So I guess maybe it's technically canonical, but like in some esoteric sort of way. I have no idea.
It's depressing. That's what it is.
It's awesome. So we're talking about Shadows of the Empire. We'll just get to that.
Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, for the Nintendo 64, and also I kind of feel to a lesser extent that Windows 95, because anybody I ever knew played it on Nintendo. But
and for the Barnes and Noble.
What? Barnes and Noble?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
It was a book.
Oh God. Okay, that was bad, and you should feel bad. Yeah. So we're gonna talk a little bit about obviously the game itself, but also a lot of the Shadows of the Empire multimedia stuff that was surrounding it, because evidently neither Chris nor I knew that this was a much bigger event than just the game release. So. I'm going to go into that in the history this episode, which is going to be a little bit longer than usual because we've got a bunch of stuff to cover.
All right, Shane, please take us away and give us the brief history, or maybe, like you just said, maybe not so brief history of Star Wars: Shadows of the Empire.
It is a time of crisis. Imperial probes scouring the galaxy for the hidden rebel base have discovered their outpost on the remote ice world of Hoth. Darth Vader, obsessed with finding Luke Skywalker, has sent his forces to engage the rebels in battle. With the dreaded Imperial Starfleet approaching, a lone freighter has entered the Hoth system. The year was 1994. Lucasfilm publishing director Lucy Autry Wilson met with Bantam Books editor Lou Aronica to discuss the future of Star Wars-related publications. It was during this meeting that Aronica proposed a major Star Wars multimedia crossover event. The intention was to explore all the commercial possibilities of a major motion picture release without actually making the film. Later that same year, Lucasfilm met with franchise licensees, including representatives from LucasArts and author Steve Perry, to discuss this ambitious initiative. The project was chiefly meant to reignite interest in the Star Wars franchise ahead of the release of the prequel trilogy, as well as George Lucas's special editions of the original films, slated for 1997. Lucasfilm originally wanted the focus to be on the main characters between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, but John Knowles, game designer for Star Wars Dark Forces, suggested that it instead take place between Empire and Return of the Jedi, an era explored by no other Star Wars material up to that point. And thus, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire was born. The main plot line that drove the rest of the surrounding multimedia for Shadows was told in a novel by aforementioned author Steve Perry. The book finds Princess Leia and Lando Calrissian leading an ultimately unsuccessful attempt to liberate Han Solo from bounty hunter Boba Fett. Aware that Luke Skywalker will attempt to rescue Han from Jabba the Hutt, Darth Vader sends an agent to Tatooine to capture him. As Luke works to construct a new lightsaber, Battle of Hoth veteran Dash Rendar saves him from assassins on swoop bikes. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, Prince Xizor, the most powerful crime lord in the known galaxy, targets Luke in an attempt to curry favor with Emperor Palpatine. Palpatine instructs Vader to trust Xizor, even though the crime lord is secretly scheming to overthrow both of them. Xizor then kidnaps Leia in an attempt to bait Luke. Lando and Dash sneak into Xizor's palace to save the princess from his clutches. Of all the Shadows of the Empire tie-in media products, the most commercially promoted would be a video game developed for the Nintendo 64 and Windows 95 platforms. With the early decision against making main franchise characters playable in the game, the developers at LucasArts were afforded more freedom to tell their story. They ultimately chose to build upon the minor but crucial character of Dash Rendar. The game's 3D world was built using the Jedi Engine's level editor, previously leveraged by LucasArts for their Star Wars Dark Forces and Outlaws titles. The game was originally planned to contain 19 levels. During development, it was reported by Nintendo Power magazine that that number was reduced to 12. Ultimately, the game would ship with only 10. A prototype Nintendo 64 was not yet available when the LucasArts team began work on the game, so they resorted to developing on a Silicon Graphics, or SGI, Onyx. Development would continue on the Onyx machine for roughly 18 months, before near-final N64 hardware was provided to the team. Fortunately, two developers had extensive experience with the SGI platform, allowing the team to port the game to the new hardware in about 3 days. For a prototype controller with which to actually test the game, LucasArts was given a modified Super Nintendo controller with a rudimentary analog stick and Z-trigger designed by Konami. To further complicate matters, the strict non-disclosure agreement the team was under dictated that the prototype controller had to remain within a cardboard box that the team could place their hands inside in order to use it. During production, senior marketing director of Nintendo Shigeru Miyamoto thought that the character of Dash should be more lively, suggesting the inclusion of idle animations and more dynamic flourishes of his weapons. Subsequently, motion capture was done at LucasArts' sister company Industrial Light and Magic, but the recordings proved to be unusable, so keyframe animations had to be used instead. Music for the game began with MIDI approximations of the original trilogy's score by John Williams, but the team felt that these did not accurately capture the essence of the songs. So, digital samples were used in their place, a move that would make the N64 version of the game unique from its synthesized music counterparts. As part of the overall Shadows of the Empire multimedia event, a full original soundtrack composed by Joel McNeely was recorded with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra. Samples from this soundtrack were used in both versions of the game, with the Windows version containing several full tracks. After a demonstration of the game at E3 1996, which was met with mixed reactions, LucasArts canceled their plans to make the game a Nintendo 64 North American launch title, postponing the release until December to allow for more polish. Mark Hy Hutchinson, project lead for Shadows of the Empire, shared his frustrations with working to complete the game under such conditions, stating, "Some team members regularly working over 100 hours every week for the better part of a year. We had to release the game shortly after the launch of the machine, and so we were under more pressure than might usually have been encountered." Shadows of the Empire would eventually be released in North America on December 3, 1996 for the N64, 3 months after the console's launch. With over 1 million copies sold by 1997, it was the third top-selling N64 title for that year, and the third top-selling game on any system for the 1996 Christmas shopping season. The Windows 95 version would be released 1 year later on September 17th of 1997. Upon release, the game received generally mixed reviews. The most common sentiment was that of praise for the opening Battle of Hoth sequence, with the rest of the levels being seen as mediocre at best. Shadows of the Empire would eventually see a re-release for modern Windows systems on May 3rd, 2016 through Good Old Games, allowing the game to be properly played on 64-bit architecture. And that is your not-so-brief history of Shadows of the Empire.
So yeah, that sounded like there's a lot of things going on with Shadows of the Empire, because all that I really knew of it was a book. I had no idea what was going on because I'm not one of those big Star Wars guys that just kind of casually follow it.
Sure.
And that it was an N64 game with a cool ass character who got screwed out canonically thanks to Disney. So that's about the extent of my knowledge of Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I had no idea that there was this whole crossover media thing surrounding it. My only I didn't even know there was a book, actually. My only exposure to Shadows of the Empire was quite literally just the N64 game, and I'm pretty sure that I got that for Christmas one year because I saw that there was a Star Wars game for my Nintendo 64 and thought that was cool, so I wanted it. That was about it. I had no knowledge of the books, and there was a comics that were made for it as well, and all the other stuff. And apparently, I think they were probably planning more for this to happen because Chris, you had actually pointed something out to me prior to the start of this episode that I never paid attention to either, that sort of hinted at this. So what was that?
Oh yeah, in the special, what were they called? Special editions?
Yeah, well,
or maybe
use the term special loosely, but yeah, sure.
They in Tatooine in A New Hope, the Outlander, which is Dash Rendar's ship, is seen taking off from Tatooine. So that kind of shows that maybe Lucas was wanting to do more with that character and that franchise.
Mm-hmm.
But we're never going to know now. Obviously, just because of how it's progressed and how so much the series has changed and how much they've done to the extended universe.
I mean, to be fair, I suppose there's always the possibility. I guess you could hold out some kind of hope for that, right? Because I did not expect them to be digging back into the Knights of the Old Republic well either, but there have been many reports recently that apparently they are going forward with producing some stuff based on that, which I really hope is good.
I think Disney's going to stray away from the main source material for a while, like the 9 episodes after The Rise of the Skywalker comes out. But yeah, just like I thought Rogue One was phenomenal, just based off the basic plot and premise of Shadows of the Empire from my interaction with it on the N64 and what I've heard about the books, is that would be a phenomenal movie for them to come out with. Just to bridge the gap in between Empire and Jedi, and just introduce kind of a new character that could be fun. Because, like I said, they did Rogue One right. So I know there are some people that don't like Rogue One, and they're entitled to their wrong opinion. But I thought it was very, very good. So they, especially in a setting that everyone understands and kind of knows what happens, and yeah, a lot of the results are already told, just being a prequel or whatever it is. It would be fine, especially like Knights of the Old Republic. We all know what happens to it. So, is that the Mandalorian? Is that what you're talking about?
No. I think that's something that's separate. They were going to be making. I'm pretty sure it was a movie. If not a movie, then a series. I can't recall off the top of my head right now. But in any case, they were going to be making some new content based on the Knights of the Old Republic storyline.
In any case, we're getting way too much into the weeds with Star Wars. Let's get back into the game angle of it. And I got it for a Christmas as well. So knowing that release schedule, knowing how big Star Wars was back then, I think for you and me, we probably both got it that launch Christmas. Because I think so. I remember getting that, Super Mario 64 and Bomberman 64. So those were the games that I remember first getting right off the bat for the N64. And I think we're going to talk about this a lot more in detail, but because of where it was launched and how close it was launched to, the released close to the launch window of the N64, I think a lot of people who haven't played it recently would be quite shocked to find out about the game's actual quality.
All right, we're just going to go directly into that already, huh? Okay, fine.
Well, I mean, we can talk about the good things first.
Be a short conversation. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think it would be that short. I really don't.
All right, so Chris and I have some differing opinions about this game, which I think is going to become very evident very soon. But I think I like this game more than it probably deserves, objectively. This is the same as let's see, what was that other game that we had talked about that I said that I liked but was actually total garbage?
Castlevania 64?
Oh yeah. Huh. Another 64 title. Interesting how that worked out. Yeah. So similar to that. So the game probably doesn't deserve it, really. And looking at it now, I can see why. And we're going to go into some detail about the different levels in this game, and why they're not good. But overall, I have a personal appreciation for it that is definitely very, very biased. So,
well, I'm sure. I mean, I think when you ever have a game that comes out on a system, and that's one of your very few games, especially back then when the N64 didn't have much, you're going to look back on that game with rose-tinted glasses. It's going to happen. And that's why when I got an N64, one of the first games I got was Shadows of the Empire, which I got for like $4. And by the way, I still think there's a very good reason why it's only $4. It's still a very low price game. But so let's talk about some of the good things, because we've already said there's obviously some underlying issues here. So some of the good things, and I'll kick one off. Probably at the time until Rogue Squadron came out, the best flight shooter game available on a console.
Do you mean overall or just the first level?
First level.
Okay.
I mean, the other levels aren't bad, but like the first level it felt like Star Wars. It was Star Wars. It blew everybody away when it came out. Obviously, yeah, it's better. I think like that one level is better than most of Descent for the original PlayStation, even with the awesome controller. So it's probably had the most engrossing and entertaining space shooter theme or flight scene in a video game up until that point. In a immensely cinematic, in a universe a lot of people were familiar with. And I thought that level, to this day, I still think that level is amazing and outstanding.
Yeah, so, so for some context, for those of you who haven't played Shadows of the Empire, the first level is the Battle of Hoth. So you are flying a rebel ship, and you are basically doing what they did in Empire, where you are fighting off, the Imperial probe droids and the ATSTs, and then ultimately the AT-ATs, which it's actually optional to do this, and you get challenge point awards for it in the game if you pull it off. But you actually can shoot off your tow cable from your ship and circle around the AT-ATs. And trip them and make them fall over and destroy them, just like they did in the movie. And so that was obviously, being the first level of the game. That was what a lot of people saw initially for Shadows, and yeah, it was done very well. There's not really a lot I can see to fault that first level. It's a compact experience. It's tight. The controls are pretty good, especially with that N64 controller, the way that it is. And you're basically reliving, the first scenes of Empire Strikes Back. So there's not really a lot that you can say against that. Unfortunately, the quality kind of takes a nosedive after that.
Oh yeah, it's a great Trojan horse level.
Yeah. It's like a band that releases a single that you're super into on the radio, and then when you go and buy the album, the rest of the album is just total garbage. Because I know that's happened to me before. It's kind of like that.
Which is why iTunes has destroyed the music industry.
Indeed. So let's stick welcome to our iTunes criticism podcast. Let's talk about it.
Let's stick with the good here. Well, speaking of iTunes, this is how we can segue. Speaking of iTunes, another good thing about this game is that, again, for the time, for an N64 game, the music is outstanding. outstanding.
Yes.
You were talking about how they wanted to go with MIDI. I am so glad they decided not to go with MIDI because, wow, for an N64 game, that's good.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in the history too, this was notable in that it was one of the few. I don't want to say only because I can't verify that right now, but either one of the only or very few N64 games that actually had digitized music in it rather than synth. So so the quality was apparent, and actually I didn't mention it in the history because we're kind of running long on it anyway. But a fun fact about that is that Nintendo actually had to make some concessions with the hardware, and they had to provide them with like a larger chip inside of the cartridge for this one to accommodate the amount of music that they actually wanted to include in the game, just because of the the file size of it at the time.
What people have to understand too is prior to Shadows of the Empire, except for maybe PC, just because you have the CD audio, and I don't think anything had come out on the PlayStation yet at this point. I could be wrong, but no one had the John Williams score on a Star Wars game on a console like that. I mean, you hit start and it goes, the Star Wars theme kicks up, and you got the scrolling text. Like it felt. I was
like really hoping you were
going
to like just start humming the song.
I almost did.
I
stopped myself.
I mean, so in that way, right, in a digitized version of it, because obviously there were games prior to that had that. I mean, you had the Star Wars games for the Super Nintendo that had adaptations of the Star Wars theme, but not like this.
Another thing I would say, the plot isn't terrible.
No, but I think that also is just because the plot was basically the book. Like the book was the main driving force behind this whole multimedia thing. So you can thank the author for, creating a decent plot line for the novel, and then they had that source material to work off of for the game.
Of course. And lastly, has some of the best cheats especially again, you're going to hear a lot of, for the time, it has some of the best cheats in a Star Wars game that you could have. A lot of good cheats, a lot of good ways to rig the system. It's a lot of fun things. Like you could fly in an X-Wing or a TIE fighter, or you could take control of an AT-ST, and it has a lot of good cheats. So there's that. And
there is that.
For me, that's pretty much about it.
All right. So I kind of wanted to, not in like excruciating detail, but I do want to step through some of like the levels in the game and just talk a little bit about how they were and why maybe there's some redeeming factors in them that might not be readily apparent.
All right. So what he's trying to say is, we've enjoyed our Taco Bell. Now it's time for the diarrhea butt spray.
Great. I'm glad we're on the same page about this. That's good. All right. So obviously the Battle of Hoth is the high point of this game. It's the most polished and the most enjoyable experience of all the 10 levels that are kind of logically broken up into 4 chapters in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So you have kind of a smattering of different game styles within this one title, which I honestly think that the developers should be at least marginally praised for, because I think it was ambitious for them to do that. You have not only the Hoth battle where you're controlling a ship, and you kind of have, you have free flight within a certain area. So you have that, and then you have the shooter sections, which are third person, and I believe you can toggle to first person if you want to. But by default, they're third person shooter sections. Then you also have space combat, where you really aren't, you don't have free movement. So you're kind of just sort of set in one area, but then you can sort of roll around in any direction and aim your guns from where you're at. So you have ships kind of flying at you from all different angles, and you have to look at your radar to figure out where they're coming from. So you have that sort of a thing. And you also have another level where you're piloting a swoop bike through a city, which actually feels like a racing game. And then you've also got some other vehicle controls at different points in the game. You've also got like jetpacks and stuff. So they did a lot of different things, and it could be argued that like maybe they tried to tackle too much and did all of these things like marginally well. But I think it's at least commendable that they attempted to do that. So the shooter levels, I will say, by and large, are total shit.
You think so?
Yes, actually, I think they're the most frustrating and annoying levels. Well, yeah, pretty much all of them. Yeah, because I'm thinking through it now, and you have either just your stock like shooter level, which is basically the second one after immediately after the Battle of Hoth. You get dropped into the base, and you have to escape, and you fight a bunch of stormtroopers, and eventually you fight an ATST.
Oh yeah, those are terrible. I thought when you said shooter, I thought you meant like kind of like the on rails turret shooters.
No. I meant like the third.
Those are the best
shooters.
parts of the game.
Yeah. Well, see, there's something we agree on.
Yeah.
No. I mean the third person shooting. That stuff sucks.
Oh, it's terrible.
So the controls are super janky. They're really hard to control. You kind of feel like you're moving through mud through most of it. The shooting is pseudo auto targeted. So as long as you kind of point in the general direction of an enemy, your laser fire will probably hit them, which I think is a small mercy because the developers realized that trying to aim dash with that analog stick sucks. But then you
can't hold down the Z button.
What's that?
You can't hold down the Z button.
Yeah, you can. So I guess that helps. But then like you think that they were kind of taking that into consideration, right? But then they also included several points in a lot of these levels where you have to do a bunch of third-person platforming, which is frustrating.
The jumping, and let me talk about the jumping real quick.
Yeah.
The jumping in this game, the platforming in this game, I absolutely despise it. I can't tell you how many times where I saw a platform, I'm like, there's no way the game expects me to jump on that. Because it doesn't look in place. It looks like it doesn't belong to part of the path, the linear path. Or if I jump on it, that's going to take me to like a secret area or something like that to get goodies. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's like, no, you really have to jump on that. Like that's really the actual path you need to go to continue the game. And and I don't like the jumps. The jumping is weird. And it seems like it's just in there because that's what games were at the time. You needed to have platforming things. Remember, this is also the transition right when things were going from 2D to 3D. So almost every 2D game had to have platforms in its shooter, whippy, jumpy thingies, right? But you get to 3D platforming and they hadn't figured out yet, you don't need to jump on everything in order to make a good game, as long as you have great level design. But they don't, because they hadn't figured that out yet.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of the things that detract from the experience in this game can kind of be chalked up to the fact that they were, in a way, sort of pioneering this stuff. So I got to give them a little bit of slack there. I mean, but at the same time, it's not like Castlevania 64 where you can kind of give them the benefit of the doubt and say like, well, they weren't sure how to translate a traditional platformer to a 3D space, and so they tried to implement a bunch of platform jumping because that's what Castlevania was up until that point. Mm-hmm. They don't even have that for this because there was no precedent really for this thing. They were just like, well, I guess that's what we're supposed to do, I suppose.
There were the Super Nintendo Star Wars games.
Well, sure. And I mean, I guess those are just straight up platformers.
They're action platformers.
Yeah. So I guess in the same way you could say that. I don't know. I guess I'm just saying that like with Castlevania, they've got a little bit more leniency, in my opinion, just because they've got a legacy that they were working with. Whereas this one could have done something totally different. And I don't think too many people would have been like, well, this isn't like, Star Wars for my Super Nintendo. This ain't my Star Wars, in the same way that a lot of Castlevania fans probably would have felt. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Well, Star Wars is more about the cinematic experience anyway, which is why I think when it was released, a lot of those sins were forgiven and they're overlooked. Just because you do have a lot of the cinematography or cinematic, that's where cinematic-like experience. Okay. But I'll just go with that. It was so engrossing that, we all overlooked the fact that shooting was crap. that your laser had the power of a butter knife in a butcher contest. So, like, there's a lot of bad things. But it was pioneering a lot. You do have to think about that too. And I think that's also why it was accepted. Kind of going back to my previous point is we all expected jumping and platforming to be in games at that time.
Right.
Especially when you get to the jetpack, which is awful. It's cool and awful at the same time.
Okay. Yeah. So talking about this platforming thing. So that first third person level after the Battle of Hoth, there's not a ton of platform jumping. There's a little bit, and then most of it is honestly just leading to bonus items or secret areas. So it's kind of at a minimum to start with. But man, do they go balls to the fucking wall with the jumping and platforming in the later levels. I can't honestly decide which one I hate more. Whether it's the level where you're basically in like a canyon the entire time and then you end up fighting Boba Fett at the end with a jetpack, or the train level. I'm leaning towards the train level because that one, Dash is on a speeding train the entire time, and you have to jump over obstacles like cross beams and things as the train is speeding along in this junkyard, in addition to fighting enemies, and then also jumping from one train to another while they're both moving at different speeds, all while trying to do this with controls and a 3D space that are not conducive to this kind of thing whatsoever. I'm pretty sure that one probably takes the cake as far as worst one goes, at least for me.
And if anyone wants to know what these controls are, right? Because on paper, that sounds like a really fun game. Because if you play that game with Mario 64's control or any of the 3D Mario controls, that's a fun experience. You know, jumping over stuff, jumping from train to train, that kind of stuff. It's fun. But you're playing the game with Resident Evil 4 controls. And it does have Resident Evil 4 controls, because it is tank controls over the shoulder while you're shooting things. Except in Resident Evil 4, you're not running and jumping and trying to cross platforms with jump. You're not platforming in Resident Evil 4. And there's a reason for that, because those controls for that kind of purpose is absolute dog shit. So and you can figure out why when you play this game.
Yeah, and to your point about like places where you don't think the game expects you to make those jumps that you actually do, that is like painfully evident in that train level where you have like another train that merges onto the tracks in front of you. This happens a couple of times, and you have to gauge the distance to make the jump just at the right time, because they're kind of wavering back and forth. And the personal issues with depth perception aside, whether or not you personally have a problem with that, it kind of doesn't matter, because it's still incredibly difficult to gauge just how far you're supposed to jump and when you're supposed to jump, just because of how the game. I mean, first of all, how the game is rendered. I mean, luckily, I think it's a little bit better with the PC version because the graphics are crisper. But we all know that as much as we like the N64, those graphics were terrible. And even though we thought they were great at the time, and Shadows suffers more so from that than something like Mario 64, for example, because of the color palette choice. And it's not necessarily the developer's fault, because it is what it is. I mean, you have a level that's in a space junkyard. So what are you going to do? It's not going to be, neon green and purple and pink or whatever. You've got to go with, friggin' brown and gray and black. And so when everything is different shade, it's like the Gears of War effect, is that same problem. And when you have a mess of graphics that are all the same shades of brown and green and black and gray, it's really, really hard to like gauge those jumps accurately. So there were plenty of times where I just plunged Dash Rendar to his untimely demise on the railroad tracks. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Although the battle with IG-88 is pretty cool, but
if you can find him, if you can see him.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't really want to give any excuses, but I mean, this of course was back. We all thought, again, it looked great back in 1996.
Up until, you had games like Spyro that reinvented the way you did draw distances. And you didn't really have to worry about that too much in Mario 64, just because, first of all, Shigeru Miyamoto and the team at Nintendo are geniuses, and they always knew how to get the best out of their games. Whereas everyone else was just playing catch-up. And... Right. Again, yeah, especially when it's drab. So not only you have a fog effect in a drab area, it's not like you're going for horror. You're trying to have people have fun in a cinematic world. Mm-hmm. And so what you get is, back then in 1996, yeah, it's not a problem. But when you go back today in 2019, or even once they figured out how to make draw distances not shit, it becomes really, really bad. And the graphics themselves, it becomes too dark or too drab, or too muddied, especially the old N64 games. It's just too muddied or too foggy. And there's always a problem in making anything look good. And maybe the Windows 95 version does look good. I haven't seen it. Because, of course, you don't have to worry about draw distances on a PC, especially now. But, they were still confined to the limitations of the hardware that they developed the game on, which at the time, PCs hadn't really taken off and separated themselves from consoles like they have now. But... so the draw distance was still there, of course. It wasn't a complete leaps and bounds more powerful than the console version.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a couple other things, moving to some of the other types of levels that the game had as well. You had mentioned the space shooter levels previously. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. I think those are probably outside of the Hoth battle, of course. I think that those were the most fun that the game had to offer. Honestly, probably just because it is kind of just a straight up arcade space shooter at that point, which is a lot of fun. And you don't have those problems of trying to navigate yourself in this 3D environment at all, because you're kind of at a fixed point. So really the only thing that you're worried about is keeping an eye on that radar and, swiveling around to, laser blast TIE fighters and stuff. And that's always fun. So those were definitely enjoyable. The problem is that I don't think it was getting to those levels because you had to slog your way through this other bullshit in order to get there.
And the speed racing level, not nearly as fun as it used to be either, because you realize you cannot control your speed bike.
I think that was one good example of many things that in this game that I think were kind of like wasted opportunities, because I think it was a good idea. I think they had a lot of good ideas.
That was a great idea.
I just don't think the execution was all that great, and I don't know whether it was because of the the environment that they were developing this under, like we talked about in the history, or the time constraints. Which also fun sort of thing about that. I found it amusing that the quote from the project lead was that that 100-hour weeks and stuff was something that was highly unusual, and that they had to deal with that where a lot of people didn't. And now we're in an environment in the games industry where that kind of crunch is just like the norm, which is sad in its own right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they had a lot of really great ideas. I just don't think they executed on them very well. I think that swoop bike level could have been a lot of fun, but the problem is like you said, it's shit to try to control that bike. And then when you're contending with terrible controls, they also put you in very, very crowded, narrow, like city streets,
right?
Where you're just constantly crashing into shit.
And of course, the point of that is so you can crash the other racers,
right? Except, like in practice, more than half the time it's just you who's crashing face first into a wall,
Right, and it's weird that happens because pretty much every single level where you're on the ground walking around, it's wide open. In fact, it's boring open. Like, there's just so much space in a lot of these levels. It's just, there's nothing really going on. It's empty. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of space to move around. And finally, like, you don't, like, it could probably benefit from being more confined at times in the regular walking around levels. Not saying it's always wide open and empty, but there's a lot of places in this game where it's wide open and empty.
Yeah, well, like that Boba Fett level in the canyon, that's a prime example of that. Uh-huh. That level is so open that it's just, there's nothing there.
Same with the Hoth base. When you start that off, until you start getting into the corridors, but there's areas in that base that are just really wide open, and there's nothing in it. And then you get to the swoop bike level,
where it would benefit from being more wide open, and all of a sudden it's more condensed and more claustrophobic kind of feel to it, where like you're going so fast, one wrong move, and you're just pile driving and bouncing off walls, and it's not fun. It may have been fun then just because the essence of speed you're getting from a console, but it's not fun today, especially with the advancements we've had in racing. And even within within Star Wars' own series, when you think about Pod Racer, came out in the same system like 3 years later.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Like Star Wars Episode 1 Pod Racer is still that game still holds up today. I have it on Good Old Games, and I played it several months back, and it is still fun.
Mm-hmm. I need to dust it off, and I have the Dreamcast version, but the N64 version was a very, very good game. And that's another thing to come out of these games is you do have the Rogue Squadron game that came out a couple years later too. That was regarded to be one of the best shooters, for the time. It was one of the best shooters. It's still regarded, had a really good series that came after it as well. That's regarded to be one of the best shooting series, especially for Star Wars, to ever be released. So you definitely know that LucasArts learned from a lot of their mistakes from Shadows of the Empire. But unfortunately, they made a lot of mistakes in Shadows of the Empire. I just don't think a lot of people remember all the mistakes that were there, especially if they haven't played it recently. Like if they played it back in the day, they're not talking about it the same way we are right now.
Yeah. So I think overall, to kind of bring this all together, I think it's probably safe to say that our general assessment is that it's a game that had a lot of ambition and had a lot of really good ideas in it, but was largely unable to execute on those ideas properly, such that you kind of end up getting a very middling gaming experience pretty much throughout, with an unhealthy smattering of some very frustrating sections that probably turned a lot of people off to actually finishing the game, which is also unfortunate because the last level is actually kind of cool. You get to do your own version of a trench run. But
so you would say it does not hold up?
Is this the first one? I think this might be the first one. Weirdly,
where you say
where I say that I don't think it's worth it.
Really? I thought you said the same about Castlevania 64. We'll have to go back and listen to that.
I don't know. Maybe that was the first one, but it doesn't happen often, actually. But
No.
Even though I personally, as I said before, have an affinity for this game that is probably wholly undeserved, as an objective assessment, I would say it's probably not worth it. If you have like $5 to spare, and apparently you can get the cartridge version for about that same price too, if that gives you any indication of the quality, just grab it on Good Old Games and spend the $5, if for nothing else than to play that first Hoth level, because that actually is a lot of fun. And if you can manage to get yourself through the other levels, like I said, the space shooter ones are worth your time. But outside of that, it's really hard to recommend.
I'm going to be a little bit less eloquent than Shane here. The game's platforming sucks. The game's foot levels suck. The game doesn't have an identity. All the levels that do something great, like the first one, which is still outstanding, is fun. It's done better in other platforms. Does this game stand up? Absolutely not. But if you played it back in the day and you want a nostalgia trip to remind yourself why games weren't as good as you thought they were, go ahead and get it. Sparky, you'll have a great time. But you won't, and you'll cry and realize that the N64 had some real serious problems that kind of get glossed over today. Not worth it. Don't buy it, unless, of course, you want to punish yourself.
Well, there you go. Or a third alternative would be join us on our stream Sunday, because in probably the next week or two, I will be hopping on our Twitch stream and playing through this game. So you can just watch.
He might change his opinion.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you can just watch us play it and enjoy my frustration and suffering and save yourself from it. So there you go.
Don't put that evil on me, Shane. Don't put that evil on me. Don't say Chris is going to play Shadows of the Empire, because no,
I didn't say
no.
That. I didn't say that. No, listen, I am taking that burden upon myself. Okay.
I'll play Streets of Rage 2 when I'm on. We'll let Shane punish himself and tell everyone that Shadows of the Empire isn't that bad of a game. as he struggles to get through it.
I mean, listen, I made it like 3/4 of the way through Castlevania 64 on our streams before too, so I am not above subjecting myself to it.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. But Castlevania 64 has charm. Shadows of the Empire has no charm.
But Dash Rendar, man,
But skeletons on motorcycles. Skeletons on motorcycles.
I can't argue with that. That's a good point. All right, so I think that about wraps up our discussion for Shadows of the Empire.
Yes.
As usual, we appreciate all of you fine listeners joining us for this newest episode. There are, of course, many places that you can find us, of which I think most of you are aware now. We're on all of the major social media platforms. You can just search Retro Hangover and you will find us. As we have stated over the past couple of episodes in this month, we now have a couple of additional things out there that you can check out if you'd like. We have our Patreon that is available. So if you like the show and would like to support us in that sort of fashion, then you can visit bit.ly/rhpatron and check that out. And we also have the merch store, which, by the way, we've gotten a couple of photos from some of our fans recently repping our 3/4 sleeve shirts. Those seem to be the most popular ones, and I have one as well, so I can see why. But that's really awesome. So we love seeing you guys in the RHP gear. So if you do go to the merch store, which is at bit.ly/RHP merch, and you grab yourself some stuff, whether it's a shirt or maybe one of the awesome ceramic steins, take a photo and send it to us, on Instagram or Facebook or what have you. And we will be sure to feature that because we love seeing it.
Make sure you pose like my French girls.
Yes, absolutely. Seductive, but, legal.
I just did a YouTuber move. I'm sorry, just disregard that. Just send us your pictures, not nudes. No NS.
Pro Jared is leaking into this episode too. He's everywhere.
No. All right. But yeah, go ahead, check out our merch. The steins are fantastic. The cheat are fantastic. If you're interested in that. And I also got the stickers and the buttons, which are also really cool. So go for it. Everyone's very happy with the quality that they received. So I'm happy if you're happy with the quality. That's all I care about.
Awesome. So until next time.
New joysticks.